May 14th, 964. The sun had barely risen over Rome when whispers began to race through the ancient city like wildfire. The Pope was dead. But not in his bed, and not during solemn prayer. Pope John XII died mid-orgy, collapsing in the throes of pleasure with another man's wife inside the Lateran palace. This was not just another scandal whispered about in hushed tones. It was the grotesque finale of a papacy drenched in lust, excess, and open blasphemy. It was a death so obscene, so humiliating, that even the most cynical Roman nobles were left stunned. But who was the man beneath the mitre? How did a 17-year-old boy ascend to the highest throne in Christendom to become the most depraved pontiff in Catholic history? And what kind of world allowed the Vatican to descend into such disgrace? Tonight, we open the book on one of the darkest chapters of the Catholic Church at time, when holy robes cloaked unspeakable desires. This is the rise and fall of Pope John XII. The 10th century was a low point for the Church, a period so chaotic and disgraceful it would later earn the infamous name pornocracy, the rule of the harlots. The Vatican, once regarded as a beacon of Christian morality and spiritual leadership, became a pawn in the brutal games of aristocratic Rome. Instead of piety, there was politics. Instead of faith, there was flesh. Rome, the spiritual heart of Western Christendom, had become a playground of indulgence for the noble elite. At the center of this corruption stood one family, the House of Alberic. Alberic II, the self-proclaimed Prince of Rome, ruled the Eternal City with an iron fist, commanding both its civic institutions and the Church itself. With no regard for the separation of powers, the sanctity of faith, Alberic bent the papacy to his will. Bishops were appointed and dismissed at his command, religious offices sold like trinkets, and the papal palace was repurposed to serve his every indulgence. He had no intention of leading souls to salvation. His aim was to ensure the papacy became a hereditary position, his son's inheritance. That son was Octavian, born in 937. Unlike other boys raised among monks or trained in theology, Octavian was molded in palaces echoing with drunken laughter, political scheming, and sexual escapades. He grew up not on scriptures and sacrifice, but on whispers of ambition and the intoxication of power. Alberic maintained a harem inside the Lateran palace itself, the most sacred site in Christendom. He used church wealth to fund personal extravagance. Octavian observed it all, absorbing every lesson in control, deceit, and domination. From childhood, he was never taught humility or grace. Instead, he learned the art of seduction and the uses of charm as weapons. He watched his father wield power over clergy and king alike. When Alberic lay on his deathbed in 954, he summoned the Roman clergy and forced them to swear an oath. Upon his death, they would crown his son pope. And so, at just 17 years old, Octavian was elevated to the throne of St. Peter. He took the name Pope John XII. What followed was not a reign of spiritual renewal, but a catastrophe that would stain the Church for generations. Octavian's elevation was not a divine appointment, but political theater coronation, orchestrated through manipulation and brute force. In the year 955, he assumed the role of both secular prince and pope. At the time, this seemed an unavoidable reality in a Rome dominated by aristocratic families. But in truth, it was the moment when any lingering boundaries between the sacred and the profane dissolved completely. John XII holds the distinction of being the youngest pope in church history, but youth alone doesn't explain what followed. He did not see the papacy as a spiritual calling, but as a throne of unchecked pleasure. With no theological training, no history of pastoral work, and no reverence for his role, he saw himself not as the vicar of Christ, but as a young emperor cloaked in divine authority. He believed the keys to heaven were his to use or abuse as he pleased. Once crowned, the 17-year-old turned the Lateran into a court of vice. He maintained a harem within Vatican walls, including married noblewomen, prostitutes, and even nuns. Widows of prominent officials were not safe, and consecrated virgins were coerced into his bed. One account stated he seduced women right inside the basilica, sometimes between services. He celebrated Mass by morning and presided over orgies by night, often in the very same chambers. The sacred and profane became indistinguishable. Rome's holy palace became a brothel in all but name. His corruption extended far beyond carnal acts. John XII brazenly sold church offices, transforming sacred leadership into a marketplace. Bishoprics were granted to those who paid, not prayed. Sacred relics once venerated by pilgrims became betting chips in drunken games of dice. Church funds meant for the poor were squandered on wild parties, racing horses, and expensive gifts for lovers. Even in an age where papal corruption was not uncommon, John XII stood out. European courts, used to rumors of vice in Rome, were still stunned by reports of his depravity. He didn't just cross moral lines, he annihilated them. For many, his papacy embodied everything wrong with power, unbound by conscience. It wasn't just scandalous, it was blasphemous. Reports accused him of raising toasts to the devil during lavish feasts and invoking Jupiter and Venus during Christian rites. In one of the most profane acts ever committed by a pope, he converted St. Peter's Basilica into a stable. Horses stood where prayers once echoed. He did not stop at sacrilege, he was also vicious. One deacon who displeased him was castrated and later died. His own confessor was blinded. Political enemies were assassinated or exiled. Appointments to church offices were often based not on character or intellect, but on physical appearance. Beauty trumped piety. By 961, his enemies had multiplied. Fearing rebellion, John XII sought to strengthen his position by allying with Otto I of Germany. He crowned Otto as Holy Roman Emperor, hoping the alliance would secure his hold on Rome. But the Pope's loyalty proved short-lived. Soon after the coronation, John began plotting with Otto's enemies behind his back. Otto, known for his strict moral code, was incensed. In 963, he marched to Rome with his army. Pope John XII fled, taking with him treasures from the church and a handful of his concubines. In his absence, Otto convened a synod formal trial before clergy and nobles. Charges included simony, perjury, murder, and incest. The synod declared John unfit for office and formally deposed him. A new pope, Leo VII, was installed. For once, the church attempted to cleanse itself of its own corruption. But John XII wasn't finished. When Otto left Rome, believing the crisis had passed, John returned this time, not as a pope, but as a general. Backed by mercenaries and driven by revenge, he stormed back into the city and reasserted control by force. He did not forgive. Those who supported his deposition were hunted down. A bishop had his right hand hacked off and his tongue ripped out. Priests and nobles were tortured, imprisoned, or executed. The Lateran became a fortress of terror. And yet, he continued to indulge. His orgies became more elaborate. The Vatican once again echoed with laughter, moans, and the sounds of hedonistic excess. Clergy, noblewomen, prostitutes all participated, willingly or not. Daylight brought fear, nighttime, depravity. John XII had become a tyrant cloaked in holy robes. His second reign was darker than the first, a final descent into madness and megalomania. He no longer ruled as pope, but as a despot reveling in humiliation and hate. The death and aftermath of Pope John XII. In the early hours of May 14, 964, the grotesque tale came to a fitting end. At just 26 years old, Pope John XII suffered a fatal stroke while in bed with Stefanetta, the wife of one of his vassals. Some say he collapsed mid-act, others say he was struck by divine punishment. Either way, his end was as disgraceful as his life. News of his death left Rome stunned. Even for a city used to scandal, this was too much. The clergy refused to hold a public funeral. No grand procession wound through the streets. No solemn mass was held. His corpse was buried hastily, with little fanfare, as if Rome itself wanted to forget. But they couldn't forget. His unceremonious burial symbolized more than disgust. It was an attempt to bury a nightmare. Yet the legacy of John XII lingered, etched in memory and record. His story became a cautionary tale of what happens when virtue is abandoned and power is unchecked. Historians now point to Pope John XII's reign as the very definition of the Church's moral collapse during the pornocracy. Some speculate he suffered from severe psychosexual disorders or narcissism, but psychology cannot cleanse the horror of his actions. His story is more than a historical curiosity, it is a warning. When religion is bent to political ends, when faith is used as a mask for personal indulgence, no institution, no matter how sacred, is immune to decay. Pope John XII did not just fail as a man, he shattered the very idea of what a pope could be, and in his life and in his death he stands as a grim reminder. Power without virtue leads not to glory, but to ruin.